wanted to talk to you today about the Volunteer Tracks newsletter is we need photos of you in action for the newsletter. I know y'all hear us talk about it a lot. You read about it in the newsletter. But we would really like to have photos of you guys working. So if you have an opportunity, if you're at an event and you have a chance to have someone snap a picture of you with a camera or with your cell phone, please do so and send those in to us, because we like bragging about you guys when you're out there working and putting it in the newsletter. So I would appreciate it if you keep that in mind while you're out there working your events. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Mr. Ralph O'Neill so he can talk to us about mandatory reporting.
I'm the chairman of the St. Tammany Self-Count, and we do an awful lot of work in this arena. And so Julie asked us to spend a few minutes with you today and talk to you about the mandatory reporting requirements in the state of Louisiana. Louisiana has one of the best health abuse laws, and unfortunately they're underused by the public, by law enforcement, by social workers, by nurses, and so forth. So we're trying to raise public awareness, and because you all are out there among seniors a lot, you may have occasion to have someone mention something to you that would go click, but mostly because most of the volunteers with SMP are seniors, you and your friends and your family may very well have the unfortunate circumstance occur where you're victimized. And we want you to have a better sense of it and know about the reporting requirements. Okay. In Louisiana, the law protects adults who are age 60 or older from any of the elder abuse types, and including a number that are not included in other states. This is actually an excerpt from the law in Louisiana, and predominantly we think of physical abuse when we think of elder abuse, but that's not the predominant form of elder abuse. The largest form of elder abuse by far is financial exploitation, which accounts for over 60% of all elder abuse. Now that doesn't mean that we minimize physical or emotional abuse or the neglect or abandonment or any of the other forms, but financial exploitation is by far the most critical form that's occurring anywhere in the country. So when you hear people talking about being victims of scam, if they're 60 or over, that's elder abuse in Louisiana. Now, as such, Louisiana, in developing its reporting laws, became one of the first states in the country to have mandatory reporting of elder abuse. And this is actually the statute, and it says requires reporting of abuse by any person. Sorry about that. And the requirement is that if you have cause to believe that someone's health or welfare has been or may be adversely affected by any of the forms of elder abuse, you are required to report it to law enforcement or to adult protective services. And your failure to do so is actually a criminal offense. It's a misdemeanor that can cause you to be in jail for up to 6 months and receive up to a $500 fine. Now, we've got an assistant district attorney here in St. Tammany Parish that's just looking for the opportunity to find a very high-profile case where he can put somebody in jail that will get all of the headlines because they have failed to report, and they should have known that they had to report. So he's looking for a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer or somebody that's clearly in a position that would know that they should report. And because they're trying to get a greater awareness that people do have a responsibility, and it is criminal not to report abuse when you have reasonable cause to believe that. Now the issue comes up, what's reasonable cause? And we all hear on TV all of these different terms like probable cause and reasonable suspicion and all of that. having cause to believe essentially means that if a normal person would raise an eyebrow at it and say, gee, it looks to me like that would be abuse, and it's founded on something solid, some reasonable observation or any knowledge that you've gained personally, then that's reasonable cause. And the nice part about it is you don't have to worry about, am I just going to report it because I think it's reasonable, or maybe that's not reasonable. If you call to report it, there's no harm done, because you can call and report to Adult Protective Services anonymously, and they will investigate it and determine it, and if there was no abuse, then they'll unfound the case and go on. Likewise, though, if there is some cause there, you've initiated an investigation that obviously needed to occur. So we really want you to be aware of the need to report for the benefit of the individual as well as for your own benefit. I mean, you don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of a prosecutor like ours. Mandatory reporting says that you'll make this report to any adult protection agency or local or state law enforcement agency. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you don't have to name the person that you suspect of abusing the person. All you need to do is give them the name and, if possible, the address of the adult. And if you can, the name of the person who's responsible for the care of the adult and any other pertinent information. But you don't have to name a suspect in this. All they want is enough to be able to get in touch with this person that you believe is being victimized, so that you can then feel like you fulfilled your responsibility and they can contact this person and make some real progress in determining if, in fact, there's been an abuse that's occurred. Who should report? Anybody should report if they have reason to believe any of the following. These are the primary forms of abuse. And it includes abuse, neglect, exploitation, sexual abuse, and it also includes self-neglect. Because under the Louisiana mandatory reporting laws, if a person is self-neglecting and putting themselves in harm, you're required to report that too, and Adult Protective Services will look into it and see if they need to take appropriate action to get this person a guardian or a conservator or someone who can look after their best interests if, in fact, they are not able to. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this under Louisiana law, and one of the things that is sometimes very frustrating, if you look at a person who is living a lifestyle that you believe is detrimental to them, and maybe they're hoarding, maybe they don't keep their home clean, maybe they've got too many pets, maybe there's a whole lot of possibilities that you would look at.
No, it's me.
I'm sorry, what?
I said it, that's me.
Oh, okay.
Hoarding and having too many pets. And
Well, you know, one of the things that the law says is that they have to be found not to be able to make their own decisions in their own behalf. What it doesn't say is that we're going to protect them from making bad decisions. If a person's competent to make the decisions and chooses to live a lifestyle that is what others might want to consider neglectful or self-neglectful, but they're competent to make that decision, they're allowed to do that. That's your right. So you don't have to worry that someone's going to be pushed into a situation where they may be adjudicated as somehow defective or whatever if they are competent to make their own decisions and decide that that's what they want to do and how they want to do it. Now, the other side of mandatory reporting is you've got to provide immunity to those people who make good faith reports. And so the Louisiana law does just that. And this is actually the immunity statute out of Louisiana state law. And it says, really simply, if you make a report in good faith in reporting an investigation or participating in the proceedings, any part that may go forward as a result of making this report on elder abuse, then you shall have immunity from civil or criminal liability. And that's really important because that gives you the satisfaction of knowing you can make the report, try to do the right thing, and be protected in the case where you may have been in error. Because as long as you were making a reasonable report, this is going to apply, and there is no civil or criminal liability imposed on you under the statutes. Now, this is actually the state law about abuse and neglect of adults. And I've actually extracted it to bring it down to this. Ordinarily, this is about 4 pages long in very small print. But essentially, there's one important thing in here that I want you to be aware of, and that's there under paragraph B. It says, any person who knowingly and willfully obstructs the procedures for receiving and investigating reports of abuse or neglect, or who discloses without authorization the confidential information about this, shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. That tells you a lot of stuff. If you get in the way of, or you do anything to try and hide the fact from an investigator, you're guilty of a misdemeanor. By the same token, if you are aware of any confidential information about an abuse report and you disclose that, you're also guilty of a misdemeanor. And this is primarily there because of the Adult Protective Services workers. This is the reminder to them that when you make your report anonymously, that they are to keep that confidential. And the law allows them to keep that confidential right up to the point where they get into court, and only a judge then can order them to release that information. And most of the prosecutors I've talked to have said they will drop the case rather than require that to be done. So there's a very strong feeling that your report needs to be held confidential, and this statute actually tells those investigators, those Adult Protective Services people, the law enforcement, you will keep it confidential until such time as the law mandates that you do otherwise. So that's important as a part of the mandatory reporting law. Now, if you make a false report of someone being abused or neglected, and you do so intentionally, you do so knowingly, to try and maybe get some retaliation against someone or to exact some sort of retribution from someone, that's also a misdemeanor. So there's actually protection from people in cases, and this occurs generally among siblings, where family members will report back and forth about this because they're squabbling over the estate of someone that they're trying to exploit. And this becomes one of the tools becomes making false reports. So these things are all there, and they're terribly important parts of the mandatory reporting requirements under Louisiana law because they offer protection for the reporter, they offer protection for the senior as well. Are you all getting this pop-up that's coming up about color scheme?
Yeah, we can see it.
I think if you click the very last one, that's what I did, it'll stop it from popping up again.
Okay. Now, in the past, you've heard us talk about elderly protective services. Well, elderly protective services, with one exception, does not exist in the state of Louisiana anymore because it's been merged with adult protective services. And it's now part of the Department of Health and Hospitals and is administered through the people who do the investigations for protected adults between 18 and 60, who are less than 60 years old, but are disabled or have other protections under the law. Those laws have always applied universally in the same way. People who were less than seniors but were protected received the exact same considerations. So all of the reporting laws were the same, all the protections were the same, all the mandates were the same. See if that'll actually go away. So now you will hear APS as opposed to EPS. The only exception to this is in the Iberia area, there is still one contract elderly protective services office out there. And we don't know how long that office is going to continue to operate, but they are still functioning as elderly protective services under a contract from the state. But APS is primarily what you'll hear when you go around the state. One of the things that's important to realize is that whether it's EPS or APS, they are not going to be looking to force people into some sort of a care facility unless judicially that's necessary. They're not interested in doing that. Their actual interest is in helping people to be protected and remain independent. So they're not going to be referring people to nursing homes or whatever unless there has been some adjudication that this person is not capable of making their own decisions, and APS has been named as a case manager in that circumstance. And those are very, very rare. So you don't have to have too great a concern that anyone's going to be trying to push our seniors aside and put them off in a nursing home somewhere where they can just go vegetate until they die. That is not the intent or the mission of Adult Protective Services. You can actually look up the law and find out what that law is in Louisiana anytime you want, and it's at this location. You can actually search that database. By the way, this is good for anything that you want to look up in the state law, and it's kept current. As the laws change and come on board, you can go to this website, you can search it a number of different ways, and you can look up pretty much anything you want to find out about Louisiana law. All the civil laws, all the criminal laws, it's all there. So this is a place where you can look up the laws if you want to know more about elder abuse and what Louisiana does to protect people. Then this is a place where you can go to get that. Elder abuse is a huge problem, and it will only get better if we make the call. So this phone number is now the only number used anywhere in Louisiana to report elder abuse. You call this number. It's manned 24/7, 365 days a year. And that is the central intake phone number for all reports of elder abuse. And what we've been telling people now for a number of years is if you suspect elder abuse, make the call. Because you can do it anonymously. You don't have to do it anonymously, but you can do it anonymously, and you may make a difference in someone's life. One of the other things that comes along with the idea of making these calls is the concept that you have to be persistent in some cases. Years ago, in the very first elder abuse conference that we held, it was actually a half-day panel presentation. One of the Elderly Protective Services investigators made the point that she had a gentleman who was being victimized by his grown son, was being beaten by his grown son, and a neighbor was reporting it. And she went out there time after time after time when the neighbor would call. And every time she would go out there, the gentleman would say, no, 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 he's not hurting me. I fell, or I tripped, or this is just something that happened, or I was in an accident. He was always making an excuse and denying that his son was abusing him. When in fact, the gentleman next door said, I know it's happening, I hear it. Well, finally, because she kept telling him to call, she got a call and went out on the 5th time that she went out. Got there, there was no response at the gentleman's front door. And the neighbor came over and said, I know he's in there. I heard the son beating on him less than an hour ago. So she called a law enforcement officer. They forced entry, went in and found the gentleman unconscious on the floor, got him to the hospital, and saved his life as a result. Because the doctor said if you had not gotten to him within the next hour, he was going to die. So the point that she was making was the persistence of the neighbor in making those reports was what led to this gentleman being saved and ultimately where they made the case for abuse against the son in spite of his wishes to prosecute him. So don't hesitate. Make those calls and make them over and over. They can't always come up with sufficient information to justify some type of an investigation, a criminal investigation. If you have any doubts that Adult Protective Services is not following up on something where there is an appropriate elder abuse investigation that you believe should be going forward, just call your local law enforcement agency. And if someone's life is endangered or their health is endangered, don't bother with APS, call 911. That's pretty much all I have about mandatory reporting and elder abuse today. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have and any concerns that you may have about this law.
All right. I've opened up all the lines. Does anybody have any questions for Ralph?
Yeah, I'd like to know who makes the decision as to whether there is actual abuse or not.
Well, if it's law enforcement that goes out, they make the call. And that's pretty easy.
Well, do they have people who are trained for that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, they do, in fact. That's a big part of what the SALT Council does. We train a lot of law enforcement.
Okay.
Adult Protective Services are trained specifically to give these issues so that they can make those distinctions.
Yeah.
And the state is so concerned that the Adult Protective Services workers be able to make these cases that they give them latitude that law enforcement officers don't get. Because they can actually, for example, go into a hospital where someone's been admitted and they can get a copy of the medical records without a subpoena, and they don't even have to pay the cost to have them printed up.
They just present their identification?
Present their identification and establish that they have a working case going.
Yeah.
Same thing for financial records. Law enforcement, on the other hand, has to go get subpoenas and warrants.
The only thing that disturbs me about this is the fact that the malefactors only get misdemeanor charges, and those are generally dismissed, and so there's not much.
Actually, that's quite accurate. Virtually all elder abuse statutes are felonies. If someone is charged under the elder abuse statutes, they are charged with felonies. And the misdemeanors that exist out there that would be a misdemeanor if it weren't for someone being over age 60 automatically has a minimum 3-year prison sentence attached to it. So now what may happen is they may do a plea bargain to bring it down to a misdemeanor if they don't feel they have a case they can make in court or something like that. But the charges themselves, the elder abuse statutes themselves, are all felonies. Any other questions or observations?
Well, thank you for that.
Well, the SALT Council believes very strongly that we need to inform and educate the people of the state of Louisiana about this. We've got some of the best laws, and they're not being used effectively. And I think that's why Julie asked me to be involved today and to just pass along some information to you. If you have any questions about elder abuse, you can always contact me at the SALT Council. We'll be happy to help out. We go to presentations on it. In fact, right now we're lining up to do a number of training sessions for local organizations in the St. Tammany area. Plus, we've got another law enforcement 8-hour course coming up later this month. So we do a lot of this. We're glad to come speak to civic groups. So call me if you have any questions or you'd like to have us involved. You can always find us on our website. It's www.stsalt.org. It looks like saintsalt.org. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, Ralph. And I'll make sure that you guys get all of that information when I send you the notes. I'll include Ralph's email address and all the numbers and things that he gave us today, so you'll have that with the notes. But we really appreciate you. That's a lot of useful information that you've given us today.
Yeah, Ralph, this is Julie, and I do want to thank you so much. Everybody attended the day-long elder abuse conference that Ralph and the SALT Council put together last month, the S&P network actually is delving just a bit into elder abuse only because we work with seniors all the time. Again, I don't know that you are going to run into a case where you're going to be aware of abuse through your S&P work, but as I said in the email, you know, because so many of you all are over 60, and your friends are over 60, and your neighbors are over 60, and you have family members over 60, that it's just good information to know, because as I was attending that conference, I was sitting in a workshop that was actually led by that assistant district attorney that Ralph mentioned earlier, and he scared the pants off me, because in listening to him, and he went into much greater detail than what Ralph did today, obviously, I realized that I actually knew a senior that may very well be a victim of a type of elder abuse. And I went, gosh, I'd never thought about it. I'd never put the pieces together. And I was kind of just mortified that I was going to have to report this. And so I just thought, you know, you all, the fact that you all are seniors makes me know that you all are interested in the welfare of other seniors, that you want to make your communities better places, and so we just put this information out there for you to use or not, but we wanted you to have it at your disposal.
Yeah. Judy, I forgot to ask Ralph, is it the same if you suspect abuse at your nursing homes, assisted living centers? Is the same kind of reporting mechanism in place?
The answer to that is yes and no. Under the new Elder Justice Act that was passed as part of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, all nursing facilities, and that includes everything that you mentioned and others, are required to notify local law enforcement of any elder abuse. However, historically and under the law in Louisiana, in a nursing home, those are reported internally to the Department of Health and Hospitals. And the ombudsman actually investigate those and then will call on APS as they need to, or turn it over to law enforcement. But now with the new federal mandate, they have to report it to local law enforcement. So they're doing both, because they have to comply with both the federal and state law.
Jeannie, were you talking about nursing home staff having to report it, or were you talking about abuse that may actually be occurring by the hands of staff at a nursing home?
Primarily more verbal abuse in a particular site. I'll go ahead and say it. It's a VA facility where my sister is, and it's more verbal abuse than it is physical or financial or anything like that. Seems to be resolved now, but I just wanted to know if it occurred again or something like that. You know, was it the same reporting mechanism?
Yes, it is in a case like the VA or something like that. The only thing that's under Louisiana law that's not specific to that would be nursing homes. But retirement facilities, extended living, things like that, all are under the issues that we've been talking about. But now the federal law also mandates that the local law enforcement has to be notified. And as an outsider looking in, you can report anything you want to law enforcement or to APS. It's up to the nursing home people to report internally up through to Department of Health and Hospitals, but also now to report to local law enforcement.
Okay, that's good to know. Ralph, thank you.
All right. Anybody else have anything to ask of Ralph? Next up, we're going to talk about the OIG report on scams. I believe Julie has some information to share with you about that.
I do. We received this last week via a link from our friends over at the OIG office. This was a report that they said actually was released initially last month, but we just got it. And Sunny will actually include the link for those of you that may be interested in reading the whole report. It's about 13 pages long. But I just wanted to give you all a heads up on the 3 trends that we are seeing right now in healthcare fraud. Sunny, if you would advance the slide, please.
Sure.
All right. 3 places where we're really seeing an uptick in healthcare fraud: criminal networks, prescription drug fraud, and home-based services. And I want to read to you all just a few words from this report. Regarding criminal networks, it says, over the past several years, OIG has seen an increase in organized criminal elements committing healthcare fraud. This may be attributed to the ease of entry into some sectors of healthcare industry, the lucrative nature of healthcare fraud, the belief that it is less violent than other types of crime, or a perception of reduced criminal penalties. Criminal networks have become a pervasive problem in durable medical equipment companies, home health agencies, outpatient clinics, and pharmacies. The schemes typically involve kickbacks, nominee owners, meaning that the owners on paper are actually not the real owners, the ones that are perpetrating the crime. The use of recruiters, we all remember Dee the home helper over there in New Orleans, and money laundering. And when they speak of criminal networks, they're not talking about the mafia. They are just talking about groups of individuals that have banded together to perpetrate fraud. And here in Louisiana, we are not unfamiliar with that, because every time we hear our friends over at the HEAT task force have taken down another group, it's usually a group. It's 5 defendants, 10 defendants. You know, it's a large group of people, and that's what they're talking about when they're talking about criminal networks. Then the prescription drug fraud has, that's kind of a new one, and I believe that we're going to try to get someone from the OIG office to talk to us about that at one of the webinars in the next couple of months. But what I can tell you now is just that Medicare Part D, during the calendar year 2012, which is the most recent year that we have information for, they spent $66.9 billion for 30 million beneficiaries enrolled in Part D programs. So there's an awful lot of money wrapped up in Part D. The prescription fraud schemes are complex schemes involving many co-conspirators, including healthcare professionals, patient recruiters, pharmacies, and complicit beneficiaries. And y'all, that's kind of the new thing, is that the beneficiaries are actually getting involved in the prescription drug fraud. They are selling their number to the bad guys. They're making a few bucks to put in their pocket, and then the bad guys are providing them with prescriptions. The beneficiary goes to the pharmacy, usually a pharmacy that's in on the take, where they then get the prescription, then they hand it back over to the bad guy, who then sells the drugs on the street. So that's prescription drug. And then finally, the home-based services, which include home health, hospice, and then personal care. And what the OIG report says about home-based services is that that while they're making some progress in home health, schemes nonetheless continue to evolve. Vulnerabilities persist, and home health remains a top oversight priority of OIG. I won't go into a lot about how the home health schemes work, because we've talked about it at great length in the past, and those of you who want more information, of course, can go and read the whole report. Hospice is sort of a new angle. That's something we haven't heard of as much. From the report, it says, fraud in this area includes falsely certifying that patients are eligible for hospice services when they are not, and then also upcoding. Continuous home care is a higher level of care meant for patients in crisis. Hospice fraud schemes involve billing for this higher level of care for patients who do not need this level of care and do not receive it, even to the point of backdating a deceased patient's file to include continuous home care that was in fact never provided. And that's what your upcoding is when you're charging Medicare for services that either were not needed or were not provided but were reimbursable at a higher rate than what the beneficiary actually required. So that's what the hospice fraud is looking like. And with the personal care services are more common within Medicaid because Medicaid pays for a lot of these services. Medicare will pay for them if, in fact, you are receiving other home health services. But it says in 2011 alone, which was the last year that the figures were available, the personal care services program spent $12.7 billion. And fraud in this program is increasing, and it includes schemes where the personal care attendant and the beneficiary act as co-conspirators, and they claim that care is needed that isn't needed. They claim that care is provided that in fact has not been provided. And again, there we see beneficiaries acting as co-conspirators in the fraud. That's a very disturbing but new development. And that's what I have from the Medicare Program Integrity Report released in June.
Very good. And Ralph had a little note about, Ralph, I just saw your note about organized crime. I'm not sure everybody will see that, but were you referring to the prescription drug fraud?
No, primarily to the durable medical equipment. They love it. And they actually, in some cases, will go in and they rent the equipment from a legitimate business and set it up in a storefront under a phony name, and they take in all kinds of money and promise all kinds of things and don't deliver, but they've got the money and they do the billing, and then they're gone in 90 days.
Yes.
And they make millions in some cases doing it. And there's no penalty for it, essentially. If they get caught, they do reimbursement.
Well, that being said, our friend Henry Jones, who ran a scheme sort of like that involving wheelchairs, he billed Medicare for about $15 million for wheelchairs that, in fact, he actually did provide the wheelchairs to the beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries had no need for the wheelchairs. And Mr. Jones is currently serving a 15-year term.
Good.
I'm smiling in case you can't tell.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
15 years.
15, yes.
Anyone have any other comments or anything that they want to say on this topic?
No.
Julie?
Yes.
Something else you have to look for. A lot of times the members of the family can be complicit with the doctors or act on their own for stealing medications to sell on the street, stealing walkers, wheelchairs, anything.
Yeah.
And they will ask the doctor for it. Grandma never gets it, and they sell it and pocket the money.
And there we are at elder abuse again.
Yeah, you're at elder abuse as well as the fraud.
Yeah.
So it's sad to say, but people are doing that. That's why it's so important with seniors when they do die that they do get an autopsy and and make sure nothing else has been going on. And unfortunately, I think we told you that in 2 states they don't even do autopsies on people over the age of 65 anymore. One doesn't do it, the other one, period. And the other state says they'll only do it when it's an apparent homicide. Well, a lot of times you can't tell it's a homicide without the autopsy. So seniors are left twisting in the wind in some of this.
Oh.
I heard somebody sigh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this shows the upcoming webinar schedule, and I didn't have a chance to change the slide about the no webinar in August. She'll be receiving a note about that shortly. We most likely, I'm not real sure yet, we have our S&P National Training the 3rd week in August, and that's normally the Monday that we hold the webinar. So just kind of look for something in your inbox about that coming up soon. But then the following one will be Monday, September 15th at 2 o'clock. So that's just something to put on your calendar.
Before we leave,
And yes,
I'm sorry.
you sure can, please.
As you all may have been able to tell, Sunny is trying her best to run the webinar today, and Julie just can't keep her dang mouth shut because she's just so used to being in control. But there's a good reason why Sunny's running the webinar today. And it is with a lot of mixed emotions that I let you all know that this is going to be my last webinar with you. I am leaving the SMP program. As many of you all know, 2 years ago, my husband and I left the Baton Rouge area and moved to the North Shore, otherwise known as Paradise. And we've been living in Mandeville. And recently, the position of Executive Director for the Council on Aging in St. Tammany Parish became open. I was asked by a number of people to apply. I did. And obviously those people in St. Tammany didn't have anybody else better to pick because, son of a gun, they picked me. So next week I will actually take over the reins of the Council on Aging in St. Tammany with much humility and amazement, but I will be doing that. You all will be left in the most capable hands of Ms. Lawless and Ms. Thomas. You know, I have been teasing for a long time now that Sunny runs the program. They just let me say program manager on my business card. I suspect there will hardly be a hiccup. You know, those of you on the North Shore will still have me hanging around. And Liz, I will be there on Wednesday. So I will, I'm sorry, on Thursday.
Okay.
I'll go Wednesday and set up the table for the big event over there in Mandeville. And so you and Dee will see me Thursday. That will all go exactly as planned. But I just wanted to make that announcement. We'll be sending out an email later today for all the people who were not able to attend the webinar so that everyone knows. I will miss you all tremendously. Working with all of you, you all have taught me much. And my experience with all of you is what has gave me the courage to think that perhaps I had something that I could offer to the 40,000 seniors that are living in St. Tammany Parish. So remember me, please, in your prayers, and I will never forget any of you all.
Oh, well, Julie, congratulations, but you will be well missed.
That's true.
Thank you, Jeannie.